Good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome, to today's masterclass of SaiU Pathways, a masterclass series organized by Sai University. And today's masterclass is organized exclusively by School of Law, titled "How to Read the Constitution." And it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Mr. Vikas Muralidharan, senior lecturer at the SaiU School of Law. Mr. Vikas brings with him a rich blend of experience in both legal practice and academia. He began his legal career under the guidance of the renowned senior advocate Sriram Panchu, contributing to high-profile mediations, including the landmark Ayodhya Babri Masjid Ram Janmabhoomi dispute. Vikas has published extensively in the areas of international and constitutional law, with his work appearing in both print and online journals, including a contribution to Lexology's International Mediation Guide, Getting the Deal Through. Very warm welcome, sir. And participants, please join me in welcoming Mr. Vikas Muralidharan. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Nilay, and welcome everyone to today's webinar, today's session. I see quite a few people of you have joined. Let's see. Is it possible for some of you to turn your videos on? That would be lovely. But if not, I understand it's totally okay. Uh, we will just start. Can all of you see my screen? Can someone confirm if the screen is visible?
Yes, sir. Your screen is visible. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
All
quick
right.
update, sir. Participants, if you have any queries, you can put it in the chat box, or if sir asks any question, you can very well write in the chat box, or it will be visible. Or if you want to talk, probably that we will put in the end of the session. So we will enable you to speak, and you can speak. Okay. Thank you, sir. Over to you.
Thank you, Nilay. Yes. So today's session is titled How to Read the Constitution, a Beginner's Guide. What we are trying to do is not to learn the Constitution. Obviously, learning the Constitution cannot happen in 1 hour or even in 1 year. Right? It takes a lot of time to master the Constitution. But what we're trying to do today is to try to learn how to read the Constitution by ourselves. And I presume that most of you have joined this webinar because you have some sort of interest in law or some sort of interest in joining a law school and seeing where the career of law can take you. But even if not, even if you're not someone who is looking towards law as a profession, this is actually really, really important for you. So let's see what the lecture or the webinar will be about. It is about understanding the structure of the Constitution, the language of the Constitution, and the meaning of the Constitution. And if you notice, I call the Constitution in the beginning slide India's supreme law, right? And we'll see why that's the case in a bit. Quickly give you an introduction. What this webinar covers will be how the Constitution is structured and why that structure matters. Then I will be giving you some few basic tips, basically three tips to read and interpret the Constitution and understand the Constitution on your own. Then we'll talk about rights and duties and values, the values of the Constitution in specific, not societal or moral values, but rights, duties, and values, and how we balance the three or balance rights and duties and you know with our underlying values and principles. And lastly, the final part of this webinar will cover how citizens and how courts shape the constitution and change its meaning. So don't worry, there will be some time for question and answers at the end where you could ask down questions. I encourage all of you to take notes. So note down your questions, any doubts you may have, and then we'll have a short Q&A session at the end where you may either uh, unmute and ask me a question, or you can put it in the chat box, right? Throughout the webinar, if you do have questions at any point of time, please do drop the question on the chat box, and if possible, I will answer it right then and there. Otherwise, we can have that discussion there. Now, before we proceed further, in the first slide, you would have seen that I called the Constitution the supreme law of the land. Why do I say that? And why is it important that we read the Constitution? And the first thing that you need to know about the Constitution is that it is the source of all the laws that are made in the country. And laws touch every single one of us, irrespective of our profession, the language we speak, the religion we follow, the place we are at, irrespective of who you are as a human being. If you are living under a state, and in our case, we're living under the state of India, the laws of India will affect you, right? Like the minute you're born, um, there's a registration process for your birth. You're registered. Before you're born, sometimes you get property rights in our country, even when you're a child in the womb, all the way up to your death. Once you die, your relatives and your legal heirs, how do they inherit your property? What happens with your property that you've left behind? So, some people say that laws affect your life from birth till death or from the womb till the tomb. But if you look at the way Indian laws are structured, it actually affects you in certain cases even before you're born and affects what happens to your property even after your death. So, irrespective of who we are, laws affect our lives and shape our lives in so many different ways. And since the Constitution is the source of these laws, it's important for us to have a basic understanding of how the Constitution works, what the Constitution does, what it says, and what these laws can or cannot be. Right? Which brings me to my second point. Sorry. The Constitution empowers citizens and limits the state. Now, this is something that's very important. The Constitution is what gives every citizen of the country and every person rights. We have various rights in our society: the right to equality, right against discrimination, right to freedom of speech, freedom of religion, right to life and personal liberty. So many different rights that you have. We commonly call these fundamental rights, basic rights. These fundamental rights are provided to us by the Constitution, which means that there are certain things that even though you are the government, even though you have been elected and voted into power, there are certain things that the king or the power holder, the sovereign cannot do, you know. Let me give you a very basic example. Let's say we all vote somebody into power and that person becomes the head of the country. Can that person make a law that says, okay, from now on, there will be no more elections in the country and I will be the permanent prime minister? No. Why can't he do that? We've elected him. He is the democratically elected leader of the country. He has every authority to make laws. Why can't a person make that law? Because the constitution prevents him from doing so, right? It is not that the governments that we elect or the people we elect to be in positions or the people who have constitutional authority, not just politicians and governments, right? And many people have constitutional authority. It is not that people who have constitutional authority can do whatever they want whenever they want. The Constitution places very, very specific limits on what is allowed by the state and what is the things that the state cannot do. For example, the state, and when I say state, I colloquially I mean country, right? And it's not referring to states of a country. We mean the nation. Right? It tells the governments and the other executives, whichever part of the state you are, it tells what are your powers and what are the things that you cannot do. And this is a very, very important to protect people's rights, to ensure that power is not used unfairly, ensure that power is not used arbitrarily, ensure that power is not used in a way to intimidate or harass or to destroy a person's rights. And so, for that very specific reason, for us to know whether the laws that are made are fair, whether the government has the authority to make these laws, reading the constitution is very, very important. But these are very legal points, right? But socially, apart from legal points, reading the constitution helps us decode what's going on in our country. It helps you decode the news. It helps you decode the various policies that are being framed by governments and ministries and departments, and it helps you participate in public debate and public conversation more meaningfully. A lot of times, if you look at the news, majority of the news is legal news. You will hear something about an election. You'll hear something about some law being broken. You'll hear something about a judgment of the High Court or the Supreme Court. Majority of the news that you see will be about something related to the law in some manner, right? And for you to really understand what's going on in our society and for you to really understand what's going on in our country and for you to decode what you are reading on the newspaper or what you're seeing on these news channels or social media news channels, right? It is important for you to read the Constitution. Furthermore, many of you may be engaged in public debate about public issues. This can be something as to, who should I vote for in the next election, or it could be something like, um, should women have the right to abortion? It could be something like, should the members of LGBTQ community have equal rights in certain aspects? These are all matters of public debate now that many of you may already be engaging in. Reading the Constitution gives you a framework or a background or a common base of understanding from which you can interpret these issues, from which you can look at these issues, in which you can deeply understand these issues better. The last thing about the Constitution that I do want to say is that it is a living document. The Constitution is just it's not just a piece of text that was framed when we got independence and then it's the same. It's a constantly living, constantly evolving document. The meanings of certain phrases in the Constitution have changed over time through courts' interpretations and through citizen movements. The phrases, the meanings of the phrases, the understandings behind them, philosophy, the judicial philosophy and the legal philosophy behind many of these articles have constantly evolved and changed with time. Beyond that, beyond that philosophical aspect to it, the Constitution is constantly amended. The Constitution was introduced to our country in 26 Jan 1950. We are now nearly 76, 77 years of the Constitution being in existence, and we have over 100 amendments. So, quite literally, the Constitution is a living document with things being added, things being removed, things being shifted around. Um, and then add to that the layer of um, interpretation that comes from the courts, changing interpretations from the courts and from citizens' movements and how they influence our understanding of the Constitution. It is a living, thriving document, right? And it is a constantly evolving document. And it can help us evolve with the times for us to read and evolve, read and understand the evolution of constitutional philosophies. So this is a basic intro. Uh, Before I continue further, just checking if there are any doubts or any questions at this stage. Okay, seeing none, I'll just continue. The next portion of our, or the first portion of our webinar now will be the constitution structure. Now, this is important, right? We will say that the constitution has four broad parts. The first part is the preamble. The preamble is like an introductory one-page document to the Constitution, and it is, in my mind, the most important thing when you start reading the Constitution is to read the preamble first. The reason is that the preamble very, very briefly, easily summarizes and encapsulates the values and the vision of the Constitution. It tells you exactly what the vision of the country is and what the basic ideals and ideas of the country are, and what is the common agreement that we have come to as citizens of this country. Uh, the agreement that we have in the way we will shape our society is very, very clearly elucidated in the preamble. And because the preamble does this very, very important function of telling us, hey, this is what our constitutional value is, and this is what the vision for our state is, it helps in interpreting the various articles that are there in the Constitution. So many times articles may have very technical phrases or very or phrases that can be interpreted differently by different people. For example, the Constitution in many places will use the phrase reasonable. The Constitution will use the phrase public order. Right? Now, what does public order mean? What do you mean when you say public order? What do you mean when you say someone is affecting public order? These are all phrases that don't have a very, very specific definition, right? Um, Similarly, there are multiple other articles of the Constitution that talk about powers of the state, the right or state governments as opposed to the union governments, what are the rights of the union government, what are the duties of the president and the prime minister, so on and so forth. If you have a core understanding of what the values and the vision of the constitution is, it's very easy for you to interpret these sections. After the preamble, we jump straight into the articles of the constitution. Now, there are various articles of the constitution. India is actually the longest constitution in the world. The longest written constitution in the world is India's constitution. Um, and each article is divided into various parts, right? So you have part one of the constitution, which talks about the union and its territories. Part two talks about citizenship. Part three talks about fundamental rights, so on and so forth. And each part has multiple articles that are existing within it. So this is the core content of the Constitution. This is exactly what people mean when they say, hey, let's read the Constitution. After the preamble, the absolute core content would be what we call the parts and articles. So after the core content of the Constitution, you have what is called schedules. Schedules, the way I explain it to my students always is like, imagine you're writing an email. And in the body of the email, you very clearly set out, you write a long body and you say, this is what I'm talking about. This is, our projections, so on and so forth, blah, 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 blah. And you say attached are the various lists that I have referred to. And you attach multiple uh, documents to the email you're typing. The schedules of the Constitution have all these technical and administrative details. So they're annexed to the Constitution quite literally like attachments to an email. And these schedules may have lists, these schedules may have, where mostly they are just lists, right? And some administrative details and some technical details. For example, the Constitution says that the central government has the power to make laws on certain subjects and the state government has the power to make laws on certain other subjects. So, in certain fields, like who's entitled to be a citizen, or how is the nuclear power of our country going to be used, in these kind of fields, the state government cannot make any decision. It only comes from the central government, right? The central government has the power to make laws on these things, on these subjects. Whereas the state government has the exclusive power to make laws on certain other subjects, right? So it used to be things like agriculture and other things like that, where the policy of the state comes from the state government, and the central government does not have power to make laws on these subjects, right? So how do we know what are these subject matters? The content of the constitution in its parts and articles doesn't list these subject matters. It simply says the union government has power to make laws over certain subjects. State government has power to make laws over certain subjects. But when you go to the schedule and you read the schedules, one of the schedules will consist of that entire list. So you'll have the union list and the state list and the concurrent list. And you can actually see and read all the various fields, subject matter fields that the central government can make laws on and the state government can make laws on. Now, without reading this schedule, you will not be able to fully understand the core content, right? So a lot of people ignore these schedules. They don't read them when they're reading the constitution. That's a very, very big mistake. Right? It's only when you read the schedules that the parts and articles, the content of them are extremely clear to you. Uh, the last thing that we need to talk about is amendments, right? We've already mentioned this before. The Constitution creates the Parliament, and the Parliament has the power to amend the Constitution and make changes to it. As society evolves, the Constitution has been amended various times. There have been the very first amendment of the Constitution amended our freedom of speech provisions, amongst others. There have been constitutional amendments which have made various things possible. For example, there have been amendments to strengthen the Gram Panchayat system in India. There have been amendments to provide reservation to the economically weaker sections of our society. So there are various amendments that have been passed over time that has been made by the parliament, depending on each and every situation and what the evolving times demand. So this is the constitution structure. We will briefly go through how it's organized. These are not all the parts of the constitution. This is just a very quick map. So part one talks about the union and its territory. Article one of the constitution actually gives the name for the country. It says the country can be called India or Bharat, right? It says India, that is Bharat, shall be a union, right? Union of states. That's what Article 1 states. So part one of the constitution very quickly tells you about the country, the very basic details of the country. It tells you its name. It tells you what the territory of the country is, what the borders are. It just says it in the articles, but then again, the territories are more specifically listed in the schedule, right? And it talks about how different states can be formed, how can you form a new state, how can you rearrange a state, how can you form a new union territory. So the most physical aspects of the country, like what is the name of the country, how is it organized, what are the states, what are their names, how do you create a new state, how do you create a new union territory, so on and so forth. And part two, it's not on the PPT. Part two is citizenship. So that goes to the other basic question of what a country is. Right? When you look at what are the things that a country needs, someone would say a country needs four basic things to survive. Number one, a territory. Number two, a population, a group of people that are living on it who can be considered citizens. Number three, a sovereign, someone who's able to take decisions on how the country should behave, what are the policies of the country. And number four is recognition by other states, that other states recognize that you exist and enter into trade relationships or any other sort of relationships with you. So the two most basic things are a territory and its citizens. So that is covered in part one and part two. Part 3 talks about fundamental rights, which gives certain basic rights to every citizen of the country or every person actually that cannot be violated by the government. Right? No matter what happens, any law that the government passes or any action that is taken by someone representing the state cannot violate any of the fundamental rights of any person in India. So there are various fundamental rights. Some of them you may have heard of. One is right to life. Then there is the right to equality. Then there's freedom of religion, freedom of movement, right against untouchability. So many various other fundamental rights that exist in our country. So this is the first actual uh, limits that are placed on the power of the parliament by uh, in the history of India. I mean, like if you look at it, the constitution is probably one of the very few documents. Government of India Act 1935 was existed. But before that, there was no limit on what the sovereign could or could not do. If you look at historically, uh, they would even say that you can't fight against the king, you can't sue the king, you can't win a case against the king. Whatever the king does is right. And but that's not the society we live in today. The rights of citizens are protected, and the state or the sovereign cannot act in arbitrary manners, cannot violate rights in an arbitrary manner. So that is the fundamental rights. Part 4 talks about directive principles. Now, what are the directive principles? Now, directive principles are things that tell you the Constitution's moral position or guiding value, right? These are things that the Constitution says that the country must move towards achieving, right? That this is the guideline for the country, and every government that comes in must try to work towards achieving or try to act in a direction that matches these principles that are given in the Constitution. There are a lot of directive principles that are part of public debate. The Uniform Civil Code is one of the biggest one of them, where the directive principles, Uniform Civil Code, is placed as a part of the directive principles in the Constitution. There's also various other directive principles that wealth must be redistributed, it must not be concentrated in a few particular hands, health, so on and so forth, right? So directive principles are more like a guiding manual for governments that these are the things we should be striving to achieve with our policies and with our laws. If your fundamental rights are violated, they are justiciable in the sense that you can go to the courts, the High Court and the Supreme Court, and say, "Hey, my fundamental rights have been violated. I need compensation or some restoration of my right." The thing with directive principles is that they're not justiciable in the sense that you can't go to court and file a case and say that, "Hey, The government must do this because it's in the director principles. Because the director principles are not some sort of binding directions, they just provide some sort of moral guidelines or direction towards which the country must progressively move towards. Right? Part 5 tells you what the union government is. So it creates, okay, we have a parliament, we have a Lok Sabha, and we have a Rajya Sabha, and it talks about how do people become members of the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. What are the various powers of the union government? What can they do? What can they not do? So on and so forth. Similarly, you have a part for the state governments. You have part 11 and 12 of the constitution that talks about the relationship between the center and the state. As you know, the state governments have their own powers, right? It's not like the center is superior to the state or that the union government is superior to the state. We live in a federal structure where both the states also have certain rights and the center also has certain rights. So, how do these rights relate with each other? How are the center and state supposed to function together? That's mentioned in part 11 and part 12. So, now we go into the meat of the subject. We'll get into reading tips. Can I just quickly check if there are, I know I covered a lot in the last 10 minutes. So, if there are any questions, any doubts, any clarifications, I'm happy to answer them. I'll just pause for a couple minutes. You can feel free to type in the chat box or anything else. Okay. All right. So let's quickly move on then. Let's start with reading tip one. Like I said before, if you have to read only one portion of the Constitution, that's all you can read, then I would say read the preamble, right? Always begin with the preamble, don't skip it. When I was in school, we used to have this in our textbooks. I don't know if that was still the case with all of you as well. But this was something that we used to read every day, and it's actually incredibly important and evocative. Let's try to have a reading right now, actually. So I will read it. Please read along with me. We, the people of India, having solemnly resolved to constitute India into a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic, and to secure to all its citizens justice, social, economic, and political, liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith, and worship, equality of status and of opportunity, and to promote among them all fraternity, assuring the dignity of the individual and the unity and the integrity of the nation. In our Constituent Assembly, this 26th day of November 1949, do hereby adopt, enact, and give to ourselves this Constitution. So, look at the words and the phrases that are used in the preamble: sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic. That's how our nation is described. These are the fundamental values of a society. And we are also saying that all of our citizens shall be secured of justice, which is both social justice, economic justice, and political justice, liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith, and worship, equality, and fraternity. Right? So this is the underlying philosophy of the Constitution. So every time you have a doubt as to what an article means, how should I interpret a particular phrase in the article? And sometimes Supreme Court judges have these doubts. What they do is they come back, they read the preamble, and they interpret the article in line with the preamble's moral philosophies. Um, it gives you, encapsulates the purpose and the spirit of the Constitution. And there are these keywords, right? So, can someone tell me what these words mean? Can someone either unmute or put in the chat box what does sovereign mean? Anybody? I just see the chat box. It says independent to take decision on ourselves. Yes, it means that no external power, no one outside can influence or try to say or tell us what to do. We have the absolute political independence to take decisions that affect our country. So we make our own laws that operate within our country. No one else has a say in that. That's what sovereign is. What's the next word? Socialist. Anyone? Anyone? What does socialist mean? All right, let's get to socialist later. Secular. Anyone knows what secular means? This is a word that most people should know. So we have secular doesn't favor one religion over another, and then someone else says every religion is seen as equal. Yeah, the understanding is right. The state has no official religion, and the state shall not promote one religion over another, right? And this is a word that means different things in different countries. There are certain countries where it means that the state will not get involved in any matters of religion at all. There's a total and complete separation between the church and the state, as they say. India's idea of secularism is unique. In India, it's not that the state or the government keeps itself away from religion, but it's supposed to treat every religion equally. It's not supposed to favor one religion or one particular philosophy or way of life over the others, right? No discrimination on the basis of religion is a core part of secularism, as can be clearly followed from that. What is democratic next? Democratic equal opportunity for everyone? No, no. Anyone else? What is democracy? Government by the representative elected by the people. Okay. Anyone else? Where does the word democracy come from? Does anyone know? People are able to choose their representatives. Okay. Okay. So what democracy means is that it comes from two Greek words. Okay, demos and kratia. Demos, kratia. Uh, and demos just means the people, and kratia means power or ruling. Right. So what democracy means is that the ultimate power in the country lies with the people. Right. So the people of the country, the general public and the people of the country, they have the ultimate power. The rule of the country is by their people. Now, there are various types of democracies, right? So, some is representative democracy, which is what Annpurna and Daniel were talking about, where People don't rule directly, but they give the job to certain people who they choose. They select certain people for the job and they say, hey, you run the country as our representatives. There's also direct democracy, where the people themselves are directly involved in democratic action and decision making, right? It's not that there is some representative who sits at some place and makes decision for us, but we ourselves go and make these decisions for ourselves. And there are certain aspects of India's democracy that does include direct democracy. Does anyone know where in India do we have direct democracy, where people are able to directly participate in meetings and panchayats? Panchayat election is different. You have panchayat representatives, right? That is an election. So panchayat representation comes through elections. People choose their representatives in the panchayat. But there are within the panchayat system, yes, there's the Gram Sabha, right? Where in every village there is a sabha that is conducted, yes, the Gram Sabha, where every person in the village can directly come, every adult person in the village can directly come, attend the sabha, and vote on decisions that are made. And these decisions are the law of that panchayat, of that gram, and they are enforceable. They have their own powers, just like the state government has their own powers with which the central government cannot interfere. These panchayats and these gram panchayats have their own powers. The way they regulate their locality itself is very unique, and those powers cannot be interfered by anybody. In fact, a very, very popular case, which I encourage all of you to read about, called the Perumatti Gram Panchayat case. I've put the name of the case in the chat box. It is one Gram Panchayat in a small village uh, from Kerala. And they took a decision to not allow a large multinational corporation to extract water from their panchayat, from their place, right? And that was a Gram Panchayat decision that was disagreed with by the state government. The state government tried to intervene and give the permission for that particular MNC. And Perumati Gram Panchayat actually sued, and the case went all the way to the Supreme Court. So it's a Supreme Court case on the rights of the panchayats, and called the Perumati Gram Panchayat case. So that is direct democracy. We have multiple different forms of democracy. So in the preamble, the word democratic fundamentally means ruled by the people. And what does republic mean? Does anyone? Yes. So democracy and republic are related. Democracy says that the power rests with the people, but republic is a very, very specific form of democracy. So when we say democratic republic, that's what we are. The head of the state is not a hereditary position. It's not a position that gets passed down like a monarchy through generations and generations. But it is happens through some sort of elected representatives where the head of state does not, it's not a hereditary position. It's selected and chosen by the people. So the question, are we a democracy or a republic, is actually a question, not just in India, anywhere in the world, right? If you're a democratic republic, the question that, oh, are we a democracy or a republic, is kind of, in a sense, a senseless question, right? There are certain conditions, right? Like, for example, when you say head of state, what exactly are their powers? Are they the ones making decisions for the people, or they're the ones making the laws, or is it just a ceremonial post? Uh, if you think about it very, very carefully, this will may help you understand the difference between a democratic republic and other kinds of democracies or of other kinds of republics as well. Right? Um, the UK has elections where people vote and decide who the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom is. And in that sense, it's a democracy because they have a democratic elections. But the head of state of UK is not the elected Prime Minister. The head of state of UK is the royal family, the monarch, right? Currently, it's the king, King of England. So the King of England exists. In that sense, UK is not a republic, it's a monarchy. But it is a constitutional monarchy where there is a constitution that provides for democracy, that provides, it's not a written constitution, but there is a form of government that is provided for, that there is a democracy, that there is an elected prime minister, and that there is a parliament, and they will debate and they will pass laws and they will do all of that. But the UK is not called a republic. The UK is called a constitutional monarchy. In India, again, the true head of state is actually not the prime minister. The head of state is the president of India. Now, when it comes to the president of India, how is the president chosen? In India, presidents are chosen through democratic means, not directly. We don't vote for the president of India, but the people who we vote for, right? The people that who we vote for together sit and they vote for who the president is, right? So it's this kind of indirect democracy where you elect representatives who make laws for you and sit in the parliament and the legislative assemblies, in Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha as well. When I'm talking about the parliament, you elect people to go to the Lok Sabha, you elect people to go to the legislative assembly of your state. Basis on the legislative assembly of your state, people are sent as representatives to the Rajya Sabha, and then these representatives who are chosen by the people, they choose the president. Right? So it is representative democracy, indirect democracy. So indirectly, the president is elected by the people. You know, the representative of the people choose the president. So in that sense, the head of state in India is the president, but the president is indirectly elected by the people. Right? So the head of state position is not hereditary. It's not a constitutional monarchy like in England. It is purely a democratic republic. Right? There are movements for making UK a republic state too. They've been on the rise and on the decline as time goes on. But that's just an example to show you the difference between countries that can be uh, republic but also have elections and also have, a prime minister that is elected by the people. Any doubts here? You don't think of a country that is not a republic but also, or countries that are republics but not a democracy. Like we saw India is an example of a country that is both a democracy and a republic. UK is example of a country that's a republic. No, sorry, that's a democracy but not really a republic. Any countries that are republics but not really democracies. Think about it. We'll come back to it at the end. Or someone's China. Yeah, perfect. China is the perfect example. There's also North Korea, Iran, Syria, various other examples. So let's get back quickly to the reading tip two. Focus on keywords, right? And I say keywords, I actually mean every single word. Whenever you read an article, a lot of words will be used, and we'll say, ah, this is just English. These are perfectly normal, reasonable words, and we wouldn't think twice about them. But these words have a lot of legal weight. A lot of debate goes into why a particular word is used and why another word is not used, right? So words like reasonable, liberty, public order, these are words that have a lot of legal meaning. You may not pay attention to them very carefully when you read the Constitution, but please underscore these words, think about why a particular word is used, and that's for every single word in the Constitution. Try to use judgments of the Supreme Court or the High Court to understand each word's meaning. I'll give you a very simple example. This is Article 14 and 15 of the Constitution. Article 14, equality before the law. The state shall not deny to any person equality before the law or equal protection of the laws within the territory of India. And Article 15, the state shall not discriminate against any citizen on grounds only of religion, race, caste, sex, place of birth, or any of them. Now, what is the difference between the two? Can you identify one particular difference? And normally, when people just read the Constitution when they're starting out, they read as yeah, they just read these two articles and they don't notice one very, very crucial and key difference is that equality before the law in Article 14 says that the state shall not deny to any person equality before the law. And Article 15 says the state shall not discriminate against any citizen on grounds only of religion and race. So what you see here is Article 14 applies to all persons, whether you're citizens or not. Right? If you're a foreigner visiting India on tourist visa, or if you're an illegal immigrant inside the country, you're still a person. Article 14 rights apply to you as long as you are a person. Right? And person, within the meaning of the law, is not just human beings. Right? It's not just natural persons who we call persons. Within the legal sense, a company can be considered a person, right? There are court judgments that have given personality or personhood rights to idols, to rivers, so many other things like that. So, person is not limited to citizens of a country, and there are also artificial persons like companies and so on and so forth. However, in Article 15, the word used is citizen. So the only way somebody can claim protection of Article 15 is to prove that they're a citizen of the country first. For Article 14, you don't have to do that. Now, person, citizen, if you are reading without this insight, it just feels like, oh, these are normal words. You wouldn't even notice the difference, right? But the very, very conscious choice to use the word person in one place and to use the word citizen in another place alters the meaning of these provisions directly. To a major effect, it changes who can approach the court under what provision or what article of the Constitution. Which brings us to reading tip three is to follow cases. When you say read the Constitution, it doesn't mean just, oh, okay, just read the text of the Constitution. The Constitution, I said, is a living document. So why does the Constitution come to life? It comes to life in the courts, in the high courts and the Supreme Courts, where Constitution is interpreted and meaning is given to the words that you see in the Constitution. That's where Constitution really lives. And I'll give you some examples. Two huge cases. One is Kesavananda Bharati. Now, this case is the case that said for the first time that the government cannot amend any part of the Constitution it wants. Right? Earlier, we used to have a position in the 1950s and 60s where the idea was that Parliament has the power to amend the Constitution, so they can amend it. They can amend whatever they want, however they want, whenever they want. They can just amend any part of the Constitution that they want. But Kesavananda Bharati interpreted the Constitution and said, even though these are not words that are there in the Constitution, Kesavananda Bharati said that there are certain features of the Constitution that the government cannot amend. Right? Even if you are an elected government or parliament, maybe all members of parliament or members of one particular political party, even then, if you have absolute authority over the parliament, even then you do not have the authority to amend certain parts of the constitution that are so essential to the constitution's life. And so that's Kesavananda Bharati. You will not know about this if you don't read the case or if you don't know what this case is, because the text of the constitution does not make a reference to this. Similarly, Navtej Johar of the Supreme Court decision said that in Article 15 over here, the word sex over here also includes sexual orientation, right? So that's clearly not a part of the constitution in itself where you see the word mentioned. There's another case called National Legal Services Authority, NALSA case, which says that the word sex in the Constitution includes gender and gender identity. Therefore, Article 15 of the Constitution protects transgender persons. Right? If you read only the article, you won't understand these contexts. Right? So, Supreme Court cases change the meaning and provide life to the Constitution constantly. So, it's not enough to just read the text of the Constitution, but also to read Supreme Court decisions on the same or High Court decisions on the same. One important thing that you have to understand is that even though we have rights, these rights are not absolute, right? There are restrictions on your rights as well, because as individuals, we also have duties. Now, I have the right to freedom of speech, but that does not mean I can randomly write a news article about someone that I don't like, spreading all sorts of lies about him, right? I can't just make up stories about someone I don't like and then publish it online or publish it in some news journal or TV channel with just the intention of ruining the other guy's reputation, right? Because that would amount to defamation. I cannot defend myself saying I have the freedom of speech, so I can say whatever I want, right? Because my freedom of speech is not absolute. So along with rights, you also have duties, right? So nobody's rights are absolute. So the court has to always balance these rights with these duties and balance these rights with the various restrictions that are placed on these rights. What are the things that guide these balancing act? How do I say where a speech that is made by someone is a part of their right to speak, or does it violate the restrictions on the right to speech? Where is the balance lie? The Constitution gives you the answer, but in terms of interpreting those answers, it is the constitutional values that we have in our country that provide us an understanding as to how do we balance our rights with our duties, what is allowed for citizens of the country and what is not allowed. For that, you need to have an idea of what these constitutional values are. Basically, justice, equality, dignity, these are words that you would have seen somewhere else. If you remember, it was all in the preamble, right? So those constitutional values give us a great way for us to uh, do this balancing act of rights versus duties. If you want to know what our fundamental duties are as opposed to our fundamental rights, you can look at Article 51A. We have various fundamental duties over there. Also, many rights by themselves, for example, freedom of speech, the Constitution will itself say, when it is giving the right, it will also say, hey, by the way, these are the various grounds on which this right can be restricted. So this, in that sense, the balancing act becomes interpretative for the court. The last two things that I want to talk about is how does the meaning of the Constitution get shaped? And the people who have a lot of stake in this is actually the citizens, right? Because citizens are the ones who are affected by the Constitution the most. But citizens also interpret the Constitution. Citizens also read the Constitution, think about the Constitution, even if not consciously, they speak of constitutional values every day in their lives. You know, many citizens file public interest litigations when they see something and they allege that there is a fundamental right that has been violated. But even without this kind of direct court action, when you are participating in a protest against a law, you are fundamentally having a constitutional discussion and you're helping shape and interpret the constitution of the country. When you engage in public debates over whether a particular law is needed or not needed, or useful or not useful, or whether a particular policy should be brought in or should not be brought in, or any public issue when you're discussing, whether you know it or not, you are providing constitutional arguments. Right? A very, very great example of this is the anti-CAA protests. When this law, the CAA, was passed, the country saw a great great number of protests across the country. What was unique or what is a very striking image from those protests is people holding up the preamble of the Constitution or texts from the Constitution in these protests and actively talking about the Constitution in public discourse. In that sense, the way the citizens interact with the Constitution also shapes its meaning, right? And when the court sits to adjudge constitutional decisions, the citizens' relationship with the Constitution and the meanings and the shape and the form that the citizen gives to the Constitution actually matters when judges make these decisions. Right? The RTI movement is another example where a lot of people had this movement for the right to information, which led to the court recognizing that the right to information, even though in the text of the Constitution it is not given, the court interpreted freedom of speech and expression said that, well, in order for me to express freely, I need information on the basis of which I can express. And therefore, the right to information is a fundamental right as a part of your freedom of speech and expression. And that led to a separate law being passed, right? The RTI law. So the way the citizens shape the meaning of the Constitution is already very clear for us to see. Uh, the next important player in this is the courts. The judiciary is the guardians of the Constitution. They interpret the Constitution. Um, as we've seen throughout this webinar, meanings of words that appear ordinary have changed through time. What is the meaning of the word person has changed, right? From just a natural person to artificial persons, and you have companies giving personhood, and rivers and idols being given personhood, so on and so forth. Um, in a very, very direct sense, as opposed to the citizens, the courts, as interpreters of the Constitution, evolve the meaning of the Constitution through its judgments. And a very glaring example is the basic structure doctrine, which I referred to earlier as the Kesavananda Bharati case, where there are certain features of the Constitution that cannot be amended by the Parliament, even though they are the democratically elected people who are running the country. There are certain things that even they can't amend in the Constitution, right? And these are brought in through how the courts interpret constitutional provisions. Another great example is the process or the procedure for appointing judges to the High Court or the Supreme Court. We now have a system called the collegium system. It was not there in the Constitution, but the collegium system evolved as an interpretative tool of the courts. The courts interpreted the provisions in the Constitution and came and created the system of the collegium system that we have today. So the courts and the citizens are two active players in shaping how the Constitution's meaning evolves and changes over time. So you've spoken about Kesavananda Bharati and Navtej Johar before. Navtej Johar decriminalized Section 377, which criminalized homosexual activity. Kesavananda Bharati placed limits on the Parliament's power to amend the Constitution. Maneka Gandhi expanded what the meaning of the phrase personal liberty is. So this is Maneka Gandhi was the Union of India. It also gave meaning to the phrase arbitrariness and what the right to equality truly means. So lastly, I would just say, if you want to make sense of the Constitution as a beginner, just read the Constitution slowly, start with the preamble, go through it article by article, underline three phrases. Each article may refer to another article. So Article 2 may say, for example, in Article 3, this may, articles may refer to the articles at different point of time. Cross-reference them. And when you're looking for judgments to understand certain articles better, I mean, it's going to take a lot of time to read the full judgment, right? So you can use court summaries and you can use commentaries. Commentaries, when I say commentaries, I mean some books that you can buy on the Constitution. These are places where you can find more information. One is the India Code websites, indiacode.nic.in. You can find and download the Constitution from there. There are also some websites, Live Law, Bar and Bench, SEC Online. These are some websites that constantly provide legal news and keeps you updated with what the Constitution is. Commentaries or textbooks, MP Jain and Subhash Kashyap are two very popular websites. Popular authors who've written books on the Constitution. And of course, if you go to the Supreme Court website, you can view every single order that gets uploaded every single day. So just to conclude, the Constitution isn't just for lawyers. It's not just for law students. It belongs to every single citizen. The very act of reading it and understanding is a radical act. So I would urge all of you to actually please go ahead, read the Constitution, read the preamble. Give it a try, try to understand it. Whether you're someone looking to start your journey in the legal field or whether you're just a curious citizen, the Constitution belongs to you. And it's a very, very important uh, piece of our country's history. And I implore all of you to read it. So that's my presentation for you. My name is Vikas. I'm a senior lecturer at Sai University. My email ID is there in case anyone wants to get in touch. And we can quickly have the session open for question and answers. So I'm here and willing to answer any question that you may know. You can please feel free to type out on the chat box in case you have any questions. You can also unmute and ask me any question that you would like.
Participants, is the final round. So I think if you have any questions or queries related to the topic or related to the admissions at Sai University for the BA program, you can very well put in the Q&A section or in the chat box like before. Uh, Professor, meanwhile, one final, question. So probably as a professor, from your perspective, if you can recommend, I think a few of the, participants are in the verge of completing their applications. So in your perspective, if you can suggest them like why a School of Law at Sai University, in a glimpse or an overview. So that if you can tell in a glimpse, that would be great, sir.
Oh yeah, sure, for sure. Now, Sai University for me, I've worked in multiple institutions across the country. Sai University for me, the biggest strength and the uniqueness of Sai University is the fact that it's an university that places a lot of emphasis on interdisciplinary learning, right? And we're a very multidisciplinary institution. We have various schools in the university. So, what I always tell people, especially at this stage, is that there's no problem in the world today that knowledge in just one field can solve, right? For example, if you look at climate change and global warming, for example, it's not just science, right? You need to know, of course, scientific innovation to reduce our dependence on carbon and other pollutants. But you also need to know economics, you need to know the law, you need to know political science, you need to know sociology, you need to know how to work with different communities across the world in order to actually effectively tackle this problem, right? So every single problem in the world today is needs an interdisciplinary approach. You can't solve problems with a unidirectional or just having knowledge of a single field. So the world today is moving beyond people who are just experts in one particular area or field of knowledge, and it gives a lot of importance to people who have interdisciplinary skills. And I think that is the most unique and core strength of SaiU School of Law, is that we focus a lot on providing interdisciplinary learning, that when you sit for your economics or psychology classes, you're not being taught economics for lawyers. You're actually studying economics with economics students in an economics classroom, with an economics faculty, with an expert economic faculty, because we also have other schools in this university through which this sharing of resources is possible, right? So when you're studying psychology, for example, you sit in a psychology class with psychology students with a psychology professor. And there's a huge difference in a traditional simple law university where you are sitting amongst other lawyers and in a psychology or economics class or a political science class or a business class or whatever. There's a difference between that and actually being able to meet, interact, discuss, debate with people who are specializing in different fields. So that opportunity for networking, the opportunity to gain knowledge from various different sources and fields, multiple disciplines, helps you shape your perspective in ways only interdisciplinary learning can. There really is no substitute for that. And in that sense, I think the SaiU School of Law does a great job. All our faculty are very approachable, very kind. We don't have any uh, filters or barriers in terms of access. You will find faculty that are more than willing to sit with students and meet students at any point of time, respond and call at any point of time in the day. It's a very supportive environment. But if you had to ask me for one very unique feature that I would suggest Sai University for, for students, when you compare it to other law universities in the country, it would be our focus on interdisciplinary learning. Like for sure, I think that's a uh, huge advantage that it has. There's also the fact that we are a liberal education university, right? And our style of education is not just lectures. It's not like we come to class and we just say, okay, section this, section that, and then this is what the case is, and that's it. Let's move on to the next subject. Like that's not how we do things here. We place a lot of emphasis on the student being able to learn on their own. We provide readings before classes. Students are expected to read, come to class, and then we have high-level debates and discussions in the classroom on the basis of that. Um, which is actually the international model of education, right? I would say in many places, we just have college is just looked at as a continuation of school. We have 12th standard, and then first year of college is basically 13th standard, and then 14th standard, so on and so forth. But that's not how university education is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a place for intellectual discussion and debate, not just learning the law. So the important thing of Sai University is that we also help you learn, try to learn how to learn the law by yourself. Um, when I was in law college, I remember I studied the Income Tax Act and the old tax regime. The very next year, the government changed all the tax laws and said, from now on, we're introducing this new thing called GST, right? That was never around when I was in law school. So laws keep changing, laws keep evolving, new laws are added to the country every year, and they'll be added to the country even after you finish law school. So if your law school experience is one that just says, hey, this is what the section says, this is what the case says, and just teaches you that, then you're not really gaining much because the next time a new act is passed, who's going to teach you? Right? So it's really, really important for you to learn how to learn by yourself. How do you read an act? How do you understand an act? How do you look at cases? How do you draw parallels? Right? This kind of critical thinking skills are really important, and Sai University places a lot of emphasis on that. And I think that's my short answer to the question.
Uh, Thank you so much, sir, for the complete explanation of the pedagogy and everything. So I think with that, I think there are no more questions. I think one is from Mohammed. So Mohammed, I think the admissions are already open. I've sent you the link in the chat box. You can very well apply, and our counselors will get back to you for BALB. So, and participants, if in case you want anything to discuss with our faculty one-on-one, you can very well connect with our admissions team. Our counselors will, arrange a session for you with the faculty. Probably you can clear your doubts and then make your decision. Yeah. With that, Professor, thank you so much for your wonderful session, and thank you, participants, for joining. And wish you all an advance happy New Year.
Thank you, thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you. Oh, 1 second, sir. I think the university is in Chennai, Mohammed. It's near Mahabalipuram, near Payyanur. Yeah, it's located exactly in Payyanur. Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you also.
Thank you.